Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Product-Led Growth Leaders. We have a very distinguished guest today that I can't wait to talk to. He is a go-to-market expert. He is a distinguished VP and fellow at Gartner. He's had a long history of product marketing and go-to-market strategy, and is also a mentor at the Stanford University's Venture Accelerator. David Yockelson, thank you for being with us today.
Thanks so much, Thomas. And it's not the years, it's the miles. So hopefully
That's right.
don't look as old as I
That's
sound.
right. So let's start off by getting into. So I met you at the Product-Led Go-to-Market conference a
Indeed.
few weeks ago in the Bay Area. And PLG is one of the comments that you made that I found very fascinating is that PLG is primarily about speed. Can you break that down for us who maybe didn't know that?
Yeah. So there are a variety of reasons why tech providers, vendors took on PLG motions over the last 10 years since the inception of the term. And I think in some cases for the wrong reasons. There was an overriding thought originally that, oh boy, this means we don't need sales and marketing to help get our products into people's hands. And that in most cases proves wrong. And so if you think about what is the best benefit that you can get from driving awareness more effectively and cutting out pieces of sales cycles and meeting buyers how they want to be met metaphorically, then the end result is things happen more quickly. And so the ability to shrink down a sales cycle and get a prospect from being a prospect to being a lead or an opportunity and to getting them to purchase something is an outcome that PLG can deliver if done correctly.
Okay, so in terms of continuing on correcting these misconceptions, you also mentioned in your talk that PLG is not always about self-serve.
Yeah.
And of course, there's more to it than that, but I think a lot of people really think of it as primarily, instead of having an operations team and a sales team, it just does its own thing and it just generates revenue and people sign up. So why should we not think of it that way?
Yeah, that happens a few percent of the time. Like you suggest, it's not impossible that things can happen with no hands and fully automated, but the types and number of instances where that's the case, first of all, most of those exist in the consumer world, and that's where I think the misconception comes from originally. And yeah, I can have B2B situations where I have this perfect match of a simple is not the right word, but a non-complex audience, small number of members of a buying team, like one, and I have a product that they understand inherently and quickly and see value from quickly. When those things happen, then and a purchase price is low enough, then somebody can press a button and I don't need help. More often, however, in B2B, we want to close large deals. We want products that are taken up by teams and across entire departments or the enterprise. And so when that is the case, invariably, a seller has to talk to a buyer to get a deal closed. Again, small instances in which maybe I have a committed spend in a marketplace and it's very simple that I could have a product purchased by clicking a button if it meets my needs, that sort of thing. But again, I think that's very rare. So in most cases, we end up with what we'll end up calling hybrid, which is we start out driving awareness through the product, but we end up having deals closed by people and sales talking to buying teams.
So you mentioned that some of these things that work as on the product side of things we're shooting for are just very often rare, and they just may be way more common in the consumer role. Do you see companies aiming for those things and then not achieving it and then getting disappointed and assuming that they're failures because they aren't achieving it?
Yeah, so the PLG roads are littered with companies that set out to fully automate and discovered one of several things along the way. Either people are not showing up, number one, we're not attracting enough people to our free offer if we have one, or they show up but they don't take us up on the free offer, or they get there and they leave. So there are a number of different wayposts along the way. And there's a significant, and this is, by the way, true of smaller companies, larger companies that have taken on the motion and not either had the right buy-in across the functions that have to be part of it, or are too impatient to wait for results, or a variety of other things like not instrumenting the product successfully or sales entering the picture at the wrong time. Lots of ways for bad things to happen.
Now, another thing you mentioned in your talk is you got into how PLG is not always about the lower CAC, customer acquisition costs. And I think a lot of it, think of it that way too. So could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, and I want to we said before, and I said before, that the number of instances where things happen automatically are small. And you can certainly have situations in which a company decides we're going to go after the SMB audience in a fully automated fashion with a product that's packaged and priced in such a way that it can be purchased easily, quickly by P card or credit card, whatever. That can happen. And when that happens, that's a good thing. But on the other hand, and I just lost my train of thought with your question.
Maybe it'll come back because there's
Yeah.
a bunch of related questions here.
Yeah.
So one of the things, and thank you for that clarification. So one of the things that was super interesting that I've heard you discuss is that there's three major groups of the PLG. Is really fascinating, and how group one of, and you listed a bunch of companies that have an inherent virality. Then there was a second group that was more B2B. And there was a third group that you talked about that was, these are the current ones to look at. Could you talk about that a little bit, just high level, this framework of thinking about those different groups?
Yeah, and I'll lead into it because now I remember what we were talking about. It was we don't always get lower CAC or customer acquisition cost out of PLGs. So the array of companies and the breadth of companies that have taken on and are taking on the motion often have had an expectation that because theoretically we don't need as much sales and marketing, or our customer acquisition costs will be lower. And so, yeah, in those, I think, rare cases in which we can automate a bunch of the activity up front, then certainly things can be lower. But if you agree with me that most B2B deals and situations end up being whatever we want to call it, product-led sales or hybrid, you still need marketing, you still need sales, and arguably you might need more, if not different, marketing and so on. So that's a bit of background. Now, so companies of all shapes and sizes and types have taken on this motion over the last, again, 10 years or so when we started talking about it. And the originals of which are probably AWS and Microsoft with Azure. The original, let's give something away to devs and see how quickly they take it up. But that has evolved, and it turned out that PLG works better when you have a product that is what I'll call inherently viral. And that means that it gains in value the more people use it, and it's easy for people to get other people involved with it. So Slack is probably the loudest, best example. A lot of the collaborative tools, Miro, all of those, Calendly, DocuSign, all of them have this kind of built-in advantage of either having a network effect where it's easy to get more people involved, or the value in it is when lots of people use it. So that was the first wave, and people look at that and said, wow, this is fantastic. We need some of that energy. But unfortunately, not every product is like that, and not every audience is like that. So the next wave were companies that wanted to drive that same virality, but had to do it differently. So you look at companies like Datadog, or products that are in categories, for example, that are focused on devs or focused on lower in the stack IT sorts of things. And they're not inherently viral, but they drive virality through advocacy. So the more fannies and seats that you can get with the products, and the more they talk about it, because devs tend to share information and they have conversations on Discord and Reddit and so on. So the more that spreads, the better off. And then the last wave are companies that may fit in that kind of a category or may not, but they're older, more established, bigger, but they see, hey, there's this way that we might be able to get better, faster, quicker attention from our prospective buyers by being in market with a product first, rather than going strictly top down with sales. And so that's where the Ciscos, the IBMs of the world, the larger heritage kind of companies are looking at their product lines and saying, can we do that with this? So that's how we're where we are.
I'm so glad you explained the inherent virality because when I first heard that, I was like, wait, are some companies destined for PLG? But I think the way you're explaining this is that with the network effect, if you're in that space, if people even know about you at all, and that means you're getting users, and that also means that's your core growth
Right.
is the users themselves are creating
Exactly.
the content, are doing all the stuff. So that's where the inherentness of it comes
Yep.
in.
Yeah, and another just great example is low code, which spreads like crabgrass inside organizations. And if you look, it's interesting, you look at the category and you can see a prevalence of freemium offer. And what freemium is all about, get lots of people using the product and drive advocacy. So good example.
Another thing that you mentioned that was really fascinating is that, and you actually just talked about it in the last question, but that virality is related to where your product exists in the tech stack. And that's interesting, right? And that's so would you say that is one of the main ways a company should view itself, that they say, what do we offer? And kind of a diagram, this is where we are in the tech stack, and this is what success would mean for us in PLG.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's an XY or a matrix that says my product is more or less technical and my audience is more or less technical. You could also replace technical to a degree with complex. And so generally speaking, the more complex a product is and the more complex your audience is, the less able you are to put that into a self-service model. That doesn't mean you can't apply some what I would call PLG tactics. So and then this is where like things like interactive demo come in. So I can create a nice interactive product experience for the product that can't it is too hard to see value from in a free trial kind of a model. So yeah, that's how. So I think you can start making initial, and you must actually make initial decisions based on this product audience combination to figure out what's the best way. First of all, what's the best go-to-market approach? And then as I refine that, okay, can I do things self-serve? If I do things self-serve, should it be a free trial? Or geez, nobody's going to be able to use it successfully in 2 weeks. Maybe that's not the best approach. That's the decision path you have to go through.
Now, one of the things that you just mentioned earlier is the right amount of buy-in from the different functions. And I think you're talking about like within a company, you have the different teams, you have the different departments, and they have to be on the same page. Can you tell us about some of the common problems that you see among those types of dynamics that keeps companies from achieving what they're trying to with PLG?
Yeah. Yeah, I'll start at the opposite end of that first, and it's the meetings with clients that on PLG that I like the best are when I'm having a conversation with three or four functions simultaneously. So when if I'm on a call and marketing and sales and engineering and an executive show up, it suggests to me that they're thinking about things the right way. So if you do the analog of that, things can go wrong and this is the way it was originally. It's that PLG is owned by the product team. End of story. No, it can't be because we need marketing. Most times we need sales. And it's not that or rather, I'd put it this way: the product and the engineering teams are incredibly important not only to build a great product with a great UX or CX, because if you don't have that, you might as well not even try this stuff. But in terms of instrumenting the product, all of that. So they're a big part of it. But the writ large marketing team has to play a role in this. So driving demand or driving awareness or putting the right search terms in place so that you're attracting users to the product in ways that are going to suggest to them, here's why this thing is going to make my life better and my day better, is another piece of it. Your finance folk probably have to buy in, because if you're going to be offering stuff for free, and let's say you have a freemium offer, those people are riding around on your dollar for some amount of time, and people have to be willing to accept that. And you also have to then price and package effectively so that you can land and expand and so on. And the last thing I'll say on this is none of this happens without executive support. Nobody just decides, oh, we're going to try this new complicated go-to-market motion tomorrow. Everybody has to be on that same page.
Now, when you're talking about the different functions, one of the things that comes to mind is like the product team and a effective product team often will involve a sort of someone who's got like different parties, like someone who's got the sort of business interest in mind. Then you have a technology lead who tells you if it's plausible to build within a certain amount of time. And then you should have a UX or CX kind of a person in that team. Do you see, as I do, or do you see it differently, that the sort of sales team and the folks working on the product led motion have a natural partner embedded within the product team of with it through UX? In other words, if people are hard headed in the development side of things, do you find or have you found that the design team is an ally for you or not? How do those dynamics work out in your
Yeah,
observation?
well, yeah. So it certainly should be, and in those situations where we see things are being done right, then there's absolutely a member of the design team that's part of the conversation, and some of the elements that you bring to bear in a product-led motion might well not might but will be different from if you didn't do that. Yeah, they're part of the puzzle. I think the dance or the magic to the dance is not everybody jutting off in different directions. I think so. Yeah, there's a design partner. That person has to be working hand in glove with the whatever you want to call them, offering manager, product manager, the folks that are charged with bringing this into life and into the market. Yeah, best worlds are there's a coupling and the coupling as well to marketing and sales, like we talked about.
Now, what does that relationship in your mind look like? So let's say you've got the design team, the UX people, and they're creating the designs that the developers are going to be working on. And then you have folks on the business side who have an idea of the vision, they have an idea of what the product market fit and all of that stuff. Is it a relationship of data where this is what we're finding out in the world? And I think you guys should pay much more attention to this. Is it a feedback loop? Is it the community of users? Or is it just vision? We think that we should take things like pivot in certain areas, and this is what we think the market is saying.
Yeah, so there's a should and or what should be done and what often happens. So in tech seems to do things a bit backwards from the way, for example, CPG companies go to market. And what do I mean by that? In fast-moving consumer goods and in many other industries or verticals other than tech, we find out what the world wants first, and then we go build it or manufacture it or whatever it is. In tech, a vast majority of situations, it's exactly the opposite. We go build something and say, this is going to change the world, and now we're going to figure out who wants it and why. I take your question with a little bit of a grain of salt. Let's say we're in tech, so it's likely, hopefully we've made informed decisions about an opportunity in the market that we want to fill. We have a decent idea of product market fit because we've talked to some sets of people, whether they're our friends or potential investors, or we've done research, or there's a space I follow that's interactive demo. And many of the founders of those companies came from SE roles or sales roles where it's really damn hard to make demos. So you have some level of experience. And then the game is, how do I build, package, price, launch in such a way that then is going to be attractive to the audiences that we want to reach? And marketing 101 says, okay, then I go about doing or creating an ICP, an ideal customer profile. So I segment and I narrow down who I go after based on I base my positioning, who I want to go after based on where we're going to have an outsized chance to win. So that's the way that things should work. But I think we do a lot of shoehorning of a thing into an opportunity too often.
Now, one of my very favorite things that Gartner produces is the Gartner hype cycle. I think it's so brilliant. It usually ages really well. Is that something that you think we should be paying attention to, that curve where we see like what people are talking about and whether it's hype and all of that stuff?
Yeah, I think with tech, a lot of things hit the peak of inflated expectations. Well, like Gen AI is one where it's zipping around the curve. But even in terms of go-to-market motions like PLG, I would probably say we are near or in the trough of disillusionment, as it were. People have tried things, there are a lot of expectations. We're somewhere between that peak and the trough. But yeah, it's a really useful model that can be applied not only looking at where a given technology or market is, but even if you look within and say, what should we do and what should we consider relative to our go-to-market, our audiences, and so on, based on where on the curve our capability is.
Nice. And one of the things in getting toward the end here, you mentioned that the future is hybrid, a hybrid model between PLG and SLG. Do you think that's because people will naturally realize that? Do you think it'll become obvious to startups at some point in the future?
Yeah. So I think it will be obvious, but it doesn't mean everybody's going to do the right things. For startups, before PLG, and even to an extent now, there's a first question we get asked, which is, okay, so we have this thing. When do I hire salespeople? Should I hire salespeople? When do I hire salespeople? What should be the characteristics of the salespeople that we hire? That's still an issue. And if, like I think I said before, if we want to close larger deals, they're more often than not won't be done automatically. Salespeople are going to have to talk to buyers or a buying team. So the sooner and the better that people realize that, the more correct sort of sales support will be there. And I don't think sales as a function is going away anytime soon. But I think the add into that is, well, it's much easier and more effective these days to drive awareness by having your product out there and letting people try it somehow, have that product experience. So I think startups are learning more quickly that you're going to have both of those components working in order to close larger deals or expand from originally landed deals.
Outstanding. David, where can people find you? LinkedIn, any place else?
Yeah, I'm here at my desk most of the time. I live in the Bay Area, in the heart of Silicon Valley. Go me. But yeah, LinkedIn's probably the easiest place to find me. And I'm there more often than I should be, and I need to get a better life.
David Yockelson, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for being here.
Thomas, thanks so much for having me. Cheers.